All right. You good to go, Jason?
I'm good to go. I'm ready.
All right. We're born ready to get geeky. So, again, hey everyone. Welcome to the second ever Science Yoga Sunday live chat, or the replay if you're watching later on. If you have any questions about what me and Jason will cover today, please type them into the chat box and we'll cover them either throughout the section or at the end. Greg Knopp says hi. Hey Greg, welcome to the chat. Hey Bernadette, welcome. We have some fellow yoga anatomy geeks from around the world. You can share where you are joining the chat from. I'm currently in Istanbul, Turkey, and Jason is in New York. So yes, so anyway, if you have any questions, be sure to type it into the chat box and we'll do our best to answer as many of them as possible. So in the meantime, we have a blend of yoga teachers, yoga students, and we have some fellow digital nomads that are chiming in from around the world. So we have a good blend of people joining us to learn about the shoulders. And regardless of how long you've been practicing yoga or teaching yoga, you'll get to learn about the scientific benefits of yoga and you get to understand your anatomy a little bit more. And what you'll learn today is you get a brief background on me and Jason and our experience with yoga, posture, functional movement in the real world. And we get to do a little foray into shoulder health with a little lightheartedness and being a little humorous, pun intended. So, Jason, what will you be showing them today?
So I'll be showing them, we'll do like a little mini anatomy lesson where we just kind of go over the features of the humerus and the scapula and talk about the shoulder joint and talk about the movements that should be able to happen at the shoulder joint and the movements that should be able to happen between the shoulder blade and the rib cage. And then that's all just kind of foundational. And then the main thing is to talk about the rhythm that should happen between the humerus when it's moving and the shoulder blade, the scapulohumeral rhythm, or sometimes it's called glenohumeral rhythm, and how understanding that and making sure it's happening can help prevent shoulder impingement syndrome. So we'll talk about shoulder impingement syndrome and what that is and how it manifests. And then application to yoga asana, we'll talk a little bit about, some troublesome cues that are still out there in the yoga world that can maybe violate scapulohumeral rhythm and cause shoulder problems down the line. And what more skillful cues might be to keep the shoulders safe.
That's pretty sweet. Yeah, I was gonna say that's pretty sweet. A yoga teacher, and I feel like this is going to be really, really helpful in terms of how to practice moving forward and how to teach moving forward. And real quick, just want to share with you guys our background story so you get a sense of where we came from. I'll share mine first. So I've been practicing yoga for almost a decade, and I've been teaching for almost 5 years. And I got into some injuries while practicing yoga, and I started to get into this place where I was only practicing yoga. I was actually kind of forsaking working out in any other form. And I couldn't really see the correlation between the injuries and just doing yoga until recently. And I started to notice my left shoulder. I would hear it crack a bit. And with the increasing awareness and knowledge about how the anatomy works, I started to be a little more cautious about how I practice and how I've been teaching other people. And I'm really excited to geek out with Jason today because Well, first of all, we met in Diane Bruni's Facebook group called Yoga and Movement Research. If you guys haven't heard of that group, definitely check it out. It's a huge, reliable resource of everything anatomy and yoga. And I noticed how, well, when I met Jason, I took a look at his website and I got to see how much vast information he has on anatomy and functional movement and how to even assess what the body's doing in specific postures. So I'm excited to introduce him. And I basically want to start off with two questions to ask Jason. For you guys, if you haven't met him before, you get to see the geekiness that Jason has. So first question is, Jason, how did you get into anatomy?
So I had been teaching yoga for about 4 years in New York. I've been teaching for about almost 20 years now. But at about the 4-year mark, like you and probably like a lot of other yoga teachers, I had experienced a few of my own injuries, and I had encountered a lot of injuries in my classes. Students coming up to me before or after class saying they have this or that injury, and not necessarily like they'd injured themselves in class, but it's possible, I don't know. But just, you know, it doesn't take long when you're teaching yoga to realize how important it is to understand what injuries are and how they happen, because you get asked about them all the time by students. And after about 4 years of that, I was suffering from a shoulder impingement syndrome. And this is why I chose this topic for today, because this topic is near and dear to me. So it started me out on trying to learn more. So I had this shoulder pain kind of in the front of my shoulder here when I would raise my arm. And I went to a physical therapist. This is back when insurance was affordable and you could actually go to the doctor when things bothered you. But I won't go into that political thing. So I went to this physical therapist, and he gave me this fantastic anatomy education about the shoulder and what I had, the shoulder impingement syndrome, and how it probably happened based on what I told him I was doing in my yoga practice. And it really kind of got me excited about learning more anatomy. So, you know, after that PT session, I rehabbed my shoulders with him, and then I decided to enroll in massage school in New York to dive more deeply into musculoskeletal anatomy, pathology, common injuries, and whatnot. And the Swedish Institute in New York is this really intense massage school. Intense by meaning, like, you know, the anatomy curriculum is really in depth. You know, it took me about 3 years to get through it. And that's how I got my start. And that was, you know, I think I graduated from the Swedish Institute in 2005. So, yeah.
Pretty cool. So when I hear the name Zenyasa, I think about Zen and Vinyasa. But I'd love to hear, and I think the group here would love to hear, how did Zenyasa come about? What is it?
So Vinyasa is kind of, you know, it's a style of yoga that I gave a name to a couple of years after massage school. I kind of went through a teaching crisis. You know, I had been teaching Vinyasa-based yoga in New York for a while. My classes were very full. It was, you know, I had a good playlist. I taught a pretty sweaty flow class. It was kind of a Vinyasa practice. There was an intention to bring some mindfulness and alignment into the practice as well. But I was doing a lot of things in that practice that I started to doubt, started to have questions about, started to not feel good about. But I didn't know what to do. You know, I kept teaching the things I had been teaching, even though I was questioning the value of them and the safety of them, because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how to change what I was doing. And I had a big following, and I didn't want to lose my following because you start worrying about your income. I'm sure this is stuff that all yoga teachers can relate to, you know. But after massage school, I went through this teaching crisis because I didn't know if I could keep teaching yoga the way I had been, and I considered not teaching anymore. But instead, I just kind of went into my own little laboratory in my studio and started thinking about, well, what do I like to practice? What do I believe in? What am I practicing now? What have I learned through my study of anatomy and exercise science and whatnot. So I started playing, and the three things that kind of informed what emerged were my personal practice in Zen Buddhism and my background in vinyasa, a little bit of my background in martial arts, and a little bit of what I was learning in massage school about Chinese medicine and the five elements, Taoist theory. And so kind of what emerged was Zenyasa, which is like to think of it as like a slow flow practice that incorporates a handful of functional strengthening exercises, that's informed by biomechanics and exercise science, that also includes a lot of Buddhist philosophy kind of weaved into the teaching, as well as a little sitting practice in the Zen tradition. So we do a Zazen practice for about 10 minutes at the end of each class. And then the structure and the sequencing is kind of inspired by the location of the 5-element meridians. And there's a strengthen and stretch focus in each class. So it was very, very different from what I had been doing. And I just one day showed up and started teaching it. And people were like, what the heck is this? And some people, I lost a lot of students. Because it was different. It was slower. We were doing squats now. I was bringing therabands to class, and we were doing rotator cuff strengthening. And but I gained a new following, over time. There was a turnover, and over time I gradually built a new following. At that time, it didn't have a name, but people would often ask me after class, what is this? What is this style of yoga? And I would just tell them what I just told you. It took me how long? Like at least 5 minutes to explain. So I didn't want to go through that whole spiel every time. So I decided to just give it a name, and then I could just tell them, go check it out, zenyasa.com. And then they could go read more about it there. So I taught Zenyasa around New York for a while. I taught at Pure Yoga at Reebok Sports Club, and then I opened my own small little studio on the Upper West Side about kind of in 2010, I think. I opened up Zenyasa Yoga and Wellness Studio. It's a very small studio, small group classes, private lessons, and I do massage there. And I teach my anatomy series there. Thanks for asking.
That's pretty dope. Zenyasa in a nutshell.
Yeah.
So with that being said, we've got some other people joining in the chat. Welcome, guys. Welcome, Michaela, Tina, Bernadette. With that being said, let's get into the heart of the topic today, shoulders. And you guys, if you have other friends, fellow yogis, or people looking to learn more about their shoulders, you can share this link with your friends so they can join in and watch along. And again, any questions, go ahead, type it into the chat box. In the meantime, Jason's gonna share his slides with us so that we can visually see what's going on as he describes the bones, the muscles, everything we need to know about the shoulders. So, all right, whenever you're ready, Jason, you can share your screen and check to see if there's any questions.
Okay, let's see.
And you guys, if you're a newbie to anatomy, there might be a shit ton of terms. Oh, yes, there might be some potty language during Science Yoga Sundays. So, yes, apologize in advance. But yes, there's going to be possibly a lot of terms that might sound foreign to you. So feel free to take notes, or you can just look at the images to get a general sense of what's happening with your body. Jason's going to give us an opportunity to get interactive with this information too.
Yeah, so am I ready to go?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I'll just go through a few of these slides, and I'll kind of pop back and forth, and we'll palpate some of the things we're looking at as well. So this slide's just showing the shoulder joint complex, and the important thing to kind of notice the complex part of shoulder joint, because there's the shoulder joint itself, which is just the joint between the head of the humerus and the socket of the shoulder blade. But then there's also the shoulder joint complex, which consists of the joints between the collarbone, the clavicle, and the sternum, which is the sternoclavicular joint, the clavicle and the scapula at the acromioclavicular joint, and then the joint between the shoulder blade and the ribs, which is called the scapulocostal joint. So it's really 4 joints. And whenever your arm moves, all 4 joints move, right? So when you're raising your arm, lowering it, putting it behind your back, there's movement at all 4 of these joints. And if we just look at the, let's see, let's jump down to the glenohumeral joint. This is the actual shoulder joint. The gleno part of glenohumeral refers to the glenoid fossa of the scapula, you know, the socket. And then humeral, of course, refers to the humerus. So glenohumeral is shoulder joint. And it's a ball and socket joint, freely movable. You know, you can, let's see, where are these movements at? Let's see, sorry. So you can flex your arm at the shoulder joint, which is when the arm swings this way. You can extend your arm at the shoulder joint. You can abduct your arm at the shoulder joint. You can abduct your arm at the shoulder joint, laterally rotate or medially rotate your arm at the shoulder joint. And again, I'm going kind of fast, but I'm going to review this kind of face-to-face in a second as well. So looking at the front of the right shoulder, you know, you have the head of the humerus, socket here. There's a couple of other important structures just to see, and we'll refer back to them later. But there's a bursa right here, which is a fluid-filled sac underneath this acromion process. And the acromion is a part of the shoulder blade. And there's a muscle here called the supraspinatus tendon that comes underneath the acromion and attaches on the side of the humerus. That's one of the rotator cuff muscles. We'll refer to that later. And there's another muscle here on the front of the arm, the biceps brachii, and one of its tendons travels through this groove and attaches on the top part of the glenoid fossa. And we're going to palpate on the arm in a second these 2 bumps on the arm. The bump on the side of the arm is, it's not labeled here, but it's called the, if I have it up here. It's not labeled there either. But basically this bump here on the side is called the greater tubercle, and the bump on the front is called the lesser tubercle, and this groove right in the middle is called the intertubercular groove, which is kind of a fun word to say. Intertubercular groove, also called the bicipital groove. So let me just jump back to you guys and show some of these things real quick. Let's see here. I can figure out how to, here we go, screen share. Okay, I think I'm back now. So if we just kind of palpate a little bit of this on ourselves, if you take the right hand and you reach across your chest to the side of your arm, right, kind of think like pure lateral, like directly on the side of the arm. And if you just rub back and forth, you might feel a little bump there inside of your arm. And that bump is called the greater tubercle. Okay? And then on the front, pure anterior, coming in straight from the front on the shoulder, that little bump is called the lesser tubercle. So I have a humerus here I can show you. This is a right humerus. So if I hold it up to the camera a little bit, the bump on the side is the greater tubercle, and the one on the front is the lesser tubercle. And the groove in the middle is the intertubercular groove. See if you can feel that groove. Once you find the bump on the front and the bump on the side, if you go at a 45-degree angle right in between, can you feel a little groove there? You might have to push kind of hard, but there's a groove there. And that groove is where the long head of your biceps brachii tendon goes. Right. How are we doing so far, Julie?
I'm trying to find, I'm still working on finding the groove in not a musical way.
Did you find the bumps?
I did actually.
Yeah, so you kind of just have to trust. You find the bump in the front, the bump on the side, right directly in between. You just push in there. That's where
there we go.
Yeah.
Oh, wait.
And then, so the structures we looked at on the slide was the long head of the biceps brachii, which came up through that groove. And then also, if you reach over your shoulder and you find kind of the spine of the scapula, which is a ridge, the bony ridge on your spine, just above that spine of the scapula, if you push down, kind of where you might like to get a massage from time to time, that muscle, well, there's the trapezius there, and then below that is the supraspinatus. And the supraspinatus tendon travels under the acromion process and attaches on the front of the humerus. So let me show you that with the bones, because the bones might be easier to see since they're 3D. There's a right arm. There's a front view. You guys are looking from the front. Okay, and then here is a posterior view. Okay. And this acromion process, I'll show you the back side, is right here. And it's like a little roof over the head of the humerus. Right? So the head of the humerus sits right underneath it. And that space between the acromion process and the head of the humerus, that space in there, is called the subacromial space, or the impingement interval. Okay. Let me go back to the slides, show you some more. So we looked at the shoulder joint. Now the scapulocostal joint, this is the joint between the shoulder blade and the ribs, right? And it's considered a functional joint. It's functional only. It's not a structural joint. That means it's not physically attached to the rib cage. There's no joint capsule. There's no hard attachment between the shoulder blade and the ribs. Functionally, it's considered a joint because the shoulder blade can move relative to the rib cage. And so the movements are that the shoulder blade can elevate, or it can depress, it can protract, which is when the shoulder blade wraps around the side of the rib cage, or it can retract, which is when it moves toward the spine. You can upwardly rotate the scapula, which is like what would happen when you're abducting your arm. And with upward rotation, the inferior angle of the scapula moves outward, and the socket of the scapula orients upwardly. And downward rotation, it's the same picture, but the arrows are different. With downward rotation, this person is lowering their arm, and when the arm lowers, the inferior border of the scapula swings toward the spine, and the socket orients toward the side. So let's do those movements together. And I know this is probably a review for a lot of you guys. Some of you it's new, some of you it's review, but review is always good with anatomy. So let's just do the movements. Let's start with the movements of the arm, the shoulder joint. And I don't have a lot of room where I'm at right now. My bed is behind me, so I'm just going to do it all from my chair. But if you want to stand up, feel free. So let's start with flexion. So with your arms at your sides, to flex your arms at your shoulder joints, just sweep your arms forward and up toward the ceiling. Okay, so that's flexion of the arms at the shoulder joints. And then when your arms are lowering, that's extension of the arms at the shoulder joints. Notice that your arm doesn't actually have to go behind you in order for it to be considered extension, because these terms are meant to describe movement, not position. Right? So if the arm is going down, that's extension of the arm. And if it keeps going down, it's still extension. Extension, 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 and then flexion, flexion, flexion. You get the idea. These are sagittal plane movements, front, back. Now abduction and adduction, if you just start to circle your arms out to the side and up toward the ceiling, right? That's abduction. And then adduction, adduction, is when your arms come back toward the midline. And all of these terms are in reference to anatomic position. Anatomic position is basically Tadasana with your palms facing forward. So if you're standing with your palms facing forward and you stretch your arms out to the side, your arms are moving away from the midline relative to anatomic position, abduction, and then moving back toward the midline, adduction. And then lateral and medial rotation. Let's bend our elbows 90 degrees. So if you just kind of flex your elbows 90 degrees. If your elbows flexed 90 degrees, take your hands away from each other. So that's lateral rotation. And then if your hands move toward each other, with your arms, that's medial rotation of the arms with shoulder joints, often called external and internal rotation, but technically lateral and medial rotation. Okay? Now, let's move our shoulder blades, and then we'll combine all this. So if you just shrug your shoulder blades up towards your ears, what's that called, Julie? That's called elevation.
Elevation.
And then if they go down, depression.
Depression.
That's depression. And keep in mind, you don't actually have to pull your shoulders down for it to be depression. They just have to be moving down, and you're depressing your shoulder blades. And then if you bring your shoulders around and kind of make your chest hollow, that's protraction. You should feel your shoulder blades kind of wrapping around the sides of your rib cage, protraction. And then if you take them the other direction, that's retraction. So they move toward each other with retraction and away from each other with protraction. Upward and downward rotation, you can't do those unless you move your arm. So we'll move our arm in the frontal plane. We'll do abduction and adduction. So if you start to abduct your arm, move it out to the side, what you should feel is your shoulder blade upwardly rotating. I mean, you might not feel it unless you're really perceptive, but your shoulder blade is upwardly rotating. And I'll show that with the bones to make it easier. The right humerus. So if I abduct this right humerus, that's abduction. The shoulder blade should upwardly rotate. And so here's upward rotation. And that should accompany abduction. And then if you downwardly rotate, if you adduct the arm, that should be accompanied by downward rotation of the scapula. Okay? That's downward rotation. How are we doing, Julie? Any questions about anything so far?
Let me check the chat box for any questions. No, we're good. No questions so far. The chat box is kind of wigging out a little bit, but we're good on video. So.
Okay. So that's kind of like overview of the movements of the arm and the shoulder blade. Now getting into kind of the juice here, the main thing we want to talk about today, which is scapulohumeral rhythm. And this is getting a lot more attention these days, which I'm really excited about because it's such an important concept. And for a long time, a lot of yoga teachers had never heard of scapulohumeral rhythm. Sometimes it's called glenohumeral rhythm. So I'll just read this. Whenever the arm moves through an appreciable range of motion, all of the joints of the shoulder joint complex will be involved. The sternoclavicular joint, the acromioclavicular joint, the glenohumeral joint, and the scapulocostal joint. The coupled actions of these joints are referred to as scapulohumeral rhythm, aka glenohumeral rhythm. The range of motion of the glenohumeral joint by itself is only 120 degrees. All right, so if you were only to move your arm, your humerus, relative to your scapula, your movement would be limited to about 120 degrees. In order to raise your arm all the way up overhead, your shoulder blade needs to upwardly rotate 60 degrees, right? So to get to 180, you got about 120 of abduction of the arm at the shoulder joint plus 60 degrees of upward rotation of the scapula at the scapulocostal joint. Scapular movement usually begins to couple with movement of the arm after about 30 degrees, but this number might vary from one person to the next. Okay, so let me come back to you guys. Okay, so what I want to do now is just a little experiment. If you try to stabilize your shoulder blades on your back, and don't let your shoulder blades move. And I don't recommend that you do this on a regular basis, but just for Science Yoga Sunday. Don't let the shoulder blade move. So we're going to abduct the arm. You could choose right or left arm. I recommend that you don't do this if you have an injured shoulder, because it'll probably aggravate the injury. So try not to let your shoulder blade move as you begin to abduct your arm at your shoulder joint. And what should happen is you should get into about that 120-degree range and just feel like you can't go any farther, because you start to feel resistance, a block. And what you're feeling, if I use the bones again, is if I'm not letting the shoulder blade move and the arm is going up, at a certain point, there's 90 degrees, at a certain point, the humerus starts to bump into the acromion process of the scapula, right? This little roof right here. So there starts to be a little bit of an obstruction. There's something in the way, So that's not good. And if you're always trying to stabilize your shoulder blade on your back as your arm is going up, then you're creating a little compression between the humerus and the acromion process, and you're pinching the soft tissue that's in there, that bursa maybe, the tendons from supraspinatus and the long head of the biceps brachii. And that's what shoulder impingement syndrome is. So it's super important to let your shoulder blade upwardly rotate in order to get the full 180 degrees. And it's not just when your arm's going up, but there's a whole bunch of coordinated rhythms that should happen. So let me just show you this table here. We have a table called the Scapulohumeral rhythm table. Actually, it's called the coupled movements table. So coupled movements of the SCC and GH joint. SCC stands for scapulocostal, right? So the following table indicates the coupled movements that occur between the shoulder joint and the scapulocostal joint through all the movements of the shoulder joint complex. So when we do flexion and extension, with flexion, the shoulder blade should protract and upwardly rotate. With extension, the shoulder blade should retract and downwardly rotate. With hyperextension, the shoulder blade should upwardly tilt. We'll go over all these with the bones in a second. With abduction, the shoulder blade should upwardly rotate. With adduction, it should downwardly rotate. With lateral rotation and horizontal abduction, the shoulder blade should retract. With medial rotation and horizontal adduction, the shoulder blade should protract. And again, we'll go over those with the bones in a second. But before we do, I just want to show you the slide about shoulder impingement syndrome, so that you can see what I was talking about with the compression. Okay, so here's the acromion process. Here's the humerus. And the space in between is called the impingement interval. Okay. Impingement of the soft tissues that travel through the impingement interval is referred to as shoulder impingement syndrome. Common causes include poor biomechanics. So that would be like moving your arm without having good scapulohumeral rhythm, for example. Extrinsic compression. This would be like carrying a heavy bag on your shoulder all the time. You're always carrying a purse or a heavy bag and you have the strap right over this acromion process. Potentially you could start to deform the acromion process over time. It could start to like bend downward a little bit and decrease the space in here. Arthritis is another cause of impingement. If you have arthritis here at the acromioclavicular joint or maybe in the shoulder joint, that arthritis is going to cause bone growth and inflammation that will start to crowd this interval. Structural abnormalities of the acromion process. Maybe some people have a deformed acromion process. I don't mean deformed, but I mean like the shape of it is such that it curves down more than it ideally would. And then another possible cause is weakness in the muscles of the rotator cuff. And we'll take up that in a second. We'll talk about how that applies in a moment. But first, back over to the screen here. So let's review with the bones this scapulohumeral rhythm. And I recommend you try to do these movements on your own, with your own arm as we do them. So the easiest ones are the ones that we already did. So let's start with those again. Abduction and adduction. So abduction of the arm swings out to the side. What should go with that? Upward rotation of the scapula. And if you have upward rotation of the scapula, you'll preserve that space, that impingement interval. And so when you're doing that, let your shoulder blade upwardly rotate. Okay? And then when your arm's coming down, you should be downwardly rotated. Shoulder blade comes down. That one kind of just happens by itself. Now with flexion and extension, as the arm swings forward, let's see, let me do this from the side. So that'll be the front over there. Okay, so as the arm goes into flexion, what should happen? The shoulder blade should protract and upwardly rotate. Right, so it should wrap around the ribs and upwardly rotate during flexion, protraction, and upward rotation. So the way to feel this is reach your right arm forward and feel your shoulder blade move away from your spine. Let it move away from your spine. That's protraction. And in a sense, what you're doing is you're keeping the socket of the scapula with the head of the humerus. So the shoulder blade follows the head of the humerus, and as it goes up, let the scapula upwardly rotate. Now, if you look at my arm and my neck, if I was in your yoga class, some of you guys would tell me to draw my shoulder blade down. I'd probably ignore you because I've injured my shoulder by doing that. Because we're so often taught, well, I don't know about so often, but it's relatively common that we're told and we tell people to draw their shoulder blades down when their arms are up, because we don't like to see that crowding of the shoulder blades up toward the ears. The problem with that is that it potentially violates scapulohumeral rhythm. It potentially pulls the shoulder blades out of their upward rotation. Right? So if you see that with the bones, it's like, let's say somebody had done their upward rotation like they were supposed to, and then they try to draw their shoulders down. You know, that might happen. Now here's the head of the humerus coming down, and the socket's facing sideways. And there's a miss here. Not only that, but there's compression there. So, you know, let's try. I'm on a little bit of a tangent right now because I wanted to go over all the movements, but let's just stay with the tangent since we're on it. So the reason that I believe that cue came around is because you would see people in class with their shoulders shrugging, and then their arms would be up like this. So they're like in this position, the shoulder shrugger. And so then we want them to relax this and pull down. So it's kind of like we have a good reason we want them to relax. We don't want them to congest their neck and their shoulder girdle. But we have to make sure that when we try to get them to do that, we don't take them out of upward rotation. So I'm going to show you 3 different ways of doing abduction. Try them all with me. And then we'll see which one feels the best. Hopefully the one that feels the best is the one that I want you to do. I think it will be. But let's try this together. So just follow after me. First one we'll try is the one that we sometimes see beginning students do where they shrug their shoulders. So start to shrug your shoulders towards your ears. Start to shrug, and then arms up. And maybe even look up a little bit. Okay? So that's that one. Okay, and then come down. So that's the congested one. Now let's do kind of the other extreme, which is draw your shoulder blades down on your back as if you're kind of plugging your shoulder blades into your back pockets. Don't let your shoulder blades move. Keep them firm on your back. Stabilize your shoulder blades. Keep your shoulder blades stable on your back as your arms go up. And if you're doing it the way I'm asking you to, which is to stabilize your shoulder blades, you'll probably feel what we felt earlier, which is like you can't quite get all the way up and you feel a little stoppage, a little block.
Yeah,
definitely. Lots of space between your ears and your shoulders. Hey, you satisfied that condition, but you're sabotaging scapulohumeral rhythm, you're creating compression, and you're decreasing your available range of motion. None of which is going to help you. So now the third way is, this just requires a little visualization. Visualize your shoulder blade as a triangle with the broad edge of the triangle next to your spine, right? And then the oblique part of the triangle is kind of lateral on the sides of your ribcage. So you have the oblique side coming down, and then the horizontal part on the middle. So that's like, it's like this, right? This is coming down, and you have this angling in. So this bottom tip. So what I want you to visualize as we raise our arms is that this part of the shoulder blade goes down and this side goes up. Right? So the lateral angle goes up and the medial angle goes down. All right, so let's turn the palms out to the side and allow the medial side of the shoulder blade to go down, but lift the lateral side of the shoulder blade up. And don't be afraid to actually reach up with the lateral side of the shoulder blade. Like reach up with the lateral side of your shoulder blade. And that should feel like freedom. You know, some of you guys are singers, you've even seen that song. George Michael, is that a George Michael song? Freedom?
We're giving our age away, Jason.
So the lateral side of the scapula lifts and reach. And this is very different. I don't know if you can see it on me or Julie, but this is very different than, let me show you the other one. Can you guys see the difference in the end range? This is like the shoulder shrugger going up. And this is me just allowing the lateral border to lift. And this is going to be so much better when you're doing like Urdhva Dhanurasana, wheel pose, upward bow, or handstand, or forearm stand, or anything, or downward dog, anything where your arms have to be overhead is going to be served so much better if you get that scapula involved. And not only that, but Roger Cole, who's somebody you should definitely write his name down, Roger Cole. His articles are really fantastic, his yoga articles. But he has an article talking about when the shoulder blade climbs up higher on the rib cage, it actually has more room to tilt backwards. Right? So as the shoulder blade goes higher on the rib cage, like if this is the rib cage, as the shoulder blade goes higher, the top of the rib cage actually gets more narrow. You know, it's broader in the middle and then it tapers off toward the top ribs. So the higher it goes, the more room it has to tilt backwards. Right? And so that means like when your arms are way up, and if you're lifting, you can actually then take them farther back with less stress, which will serve you in forearm stand and upward bow. How are we doing on time, Julie?
So we actually have about 50 left in the session. And so
I wanted to talk about how to prevent shoulder impingement syndrome. And I didn't quite get through all the other movements. Do I have 5 more minutes to try to quickly do that, or what do you think?
Yeah, let's go over that for the next 5 minutes and then give the folks a chance to ask any questions for the last bit.
Okay. So back to that coupled movements table, I was saying that abduction and adduction should be coupled with upward and downward rotation of the scapula. Flexion should be coupled with protraction and upward rotation of the scapula. Extension would be downward rotation of the scapula and retraction. So reach your arms forward and up for a second. And then as your arms start to go forward and down, this is extension of the arms, allow your shoulder blades to downwardly rotate. And then when your arms are at your sides, your shoulder blades move toward each other. Okay, you should feel that. And then flex your elbows 90 degrees, so. And then laterally rotate your arms. Your hands move away from each other. You should feel your shoulder blades move toward each other. That's retraction. And then when you immediately rotate your arms, you should feel it natural to let the shoulder blades move away from each other, protraction. So if you can really get this concept down of scapulohumeral rhythm, it's going to inform how you cue yoga postures. For example, if you were to take your arms in front of yourself and entwine your arms, right, like you're getting ready to do Garudasana. Since this is a movement out in front, it should be accompanied by protraction. So you shouldn't really cue somebody in this pose. You shouldn't cue them to draw their shoulder blades together. If you do, you're kind of violating scapulohumeral rhythm. You're taking the socket of the shoulder blade away from the head of the humerus. If somebody was bringing their arms behind their back, then you would want them to squeeze their shoulder blades together. Well, by the way, on that table, there's also horizontal adduction, and that should be coupled with protraction. and horizontal extension, or abduction, which is coupled with retraction. Now, let me jump over to the slide just to show you these last couple of slides on here. I know we're running out of time. So one of the jobs of your rotator cuff, here's your rotator cuff. One of the jobs of the rotator cuff is to help stabilize the head of the humerus. Oops, where we go? Sorry, there we go. Is to help stabilize the head of the humerus. So these are muscles on the anterior and posterior side of the shoulder blade. On the back side of the shoulder blade, you have infraspinatus and then teres minor. On the anterior side of the shoulder blade, you have subscapularis. The tendons of these muscles wrap around the head of the humerus to form a tendinous cuff, which is why it's called the rotator cuff. And when your arm is going up toward the ceiling, these muscles are meant to draw the arm bone down into the socket. Let's see. So here's a model posterior view of a shoulder blade showing the muscles, anterior view showing the muscle in the front subscapularis. If I use my hands to kind of like wrap around the scapula, my fingers like tendons, I'm going to use the bones. So if those rotator cuff muscles wrap around the head of the humerus like this, when the arm is going up toward the ceiling, those muscles can pull it down into the socket. So their job is to kind of anchor the head of the humerus in the socket. You don't want, when your arm's going up, you don't want the head of the humerus to roll out of the socket. That would be bad. Right? You don't want that. You also don't want it to glide up into the acromion process. So those rotator cuff muscles help anchor it into the socket. So maintaining some tone in those rotator cuff muscles is a good way of helping to maintain stability in the shoulder joint. And there's a couple of exercises that are kind of classic for strengthening the rotator cuff. I have them listed here. Here we go. So there's lateral rotation exercises and medial rotation exercises to help strengthen the rotator cuff. And basically this slide is all about preventing shoulder impingement. A few suggestions. One is to laterally rotate the arm before abducting or flexing, which it helps engage the rotator cuff muscles. It also helps to swing the greater tubercle of the humerus out of the way. The greater tubercle is that large one on the side of your arm. If you externally rotate your arm before you abduct it, it helps to get that larger sized tubercle out of the way. And then another way is to make sure that scapulohumeral rhythm is happening. Make sure you're following those coupled movements on that table. And another way of preventing shoulder impingement is to strengthen the muscles of your rotator cuff using therabands and or light weights. And I actually have some videos online. I mean, you could go to YouTube and you could just Google, just go to YouTube and search for how to strengthen the rotator cuff. If you go to my anatomy website, asfyt.com, and you go to the blog, and you just type in the search field on the blog, scapulohumeral rhythm, I have a whole bunch of videos about what we just talked about. And I think it's the third or fourth video that focuses on strengthening the rotator cuff. And I have a bunch of ways to do that with therabands and light weights, and also just in the yoga class without weights at all. And I know we're almost out of time, Julie, or we're out of time, but really quick, because this is kind of the juicy thing. A couple of really important things about what not to say in a yoga class, because it violates scapulohumeral rhythm, is just don't say draw your shoulder blades down your back when your arms are going up. Try to say things like, keep your shoulders relaxed and reach the outer arms up. Lift the outer arms while you relax your neck. Or say relaxation, but don't say draw your shoulder blades down. Another thing would be like if you're in plank pose. In plank pose, you should actually push into the floor and get broad across your upper back, because that's protraction. So you wouldn't say anything like melt your heart in plank, which was like an Anusara thing for a while. Melt the heart in plank. because that would be retraction. Another important one is don't say plug your arms into the sockets. So if your arms are out in front, everybody do this. If your arms are out in front, do it, Julie. Your
All
arms
right,
are
I'm
out in
doing
front,
it. I'm
and then
doing it.
I say plug your arms into the sockets. Go ahead. What happens? Plug your arms in. You just retracted your scapulae and unplugged your arms. You just unplugged them because now the socket turned to the side and the humerus is here. And here's the socket, here's the humerus. So you want the socket to face the humerus, so don't retract. So that's enough for now. But if you want more on that, I have a few other things that we say in yoga sometimes that violate scapulohumeral rhythm on that blog. But hopefully there's been a lot of information, I realize. But back over to you, Julie.
For those of you still watching at this point, I was saying before the internet cut out that I was guilty of teaching those cues about drawing the shoulders down away from the ears because that was what was taught to me. So it's really cool that Jason was able to share these things of what not to say during cueing. So thank you very much, Jason. And we have a couple minutes left, and I thought it'd be good to give the folks an opportunity to ask any questions. Let's see. Someone said, that was amazing, Jason. Cleared up some anatomical misconceptions. Yes, definitely, for sure. And when I think about what you were talking about, every time we do the arms raising up, I think about poses like chair pose, Utkatasana. I think about a basic sun salutation where people go from Uttanasana all the way up to Tadasana with the arms. So it's amazing how these nuances don't really get covered in a normal yoga class.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, if you guys are watching the replay later on, or if you have a question that popped up after watching this video, please feel free to reply back to the email and I'll send it over to Jason and we can answer them for you. And in the meantime, we have about 2 minutes left. Let's check my notes right here. So based on the positive feedback in the comments, I think a lot of people got a lot of value with what you had to share, Jason. And I think that some would love to learn more about not just the scapulohumeral rhythm, but the rest of the anatomy when it comes to yoga. And I know you have a really amazing master course, or I like to call it master course, that you have in New York, but for the folks that are watching from everywhere else in the world, there's actually an online version of your course, a very intensive version of the training. So can you share with everyone what that is?
Yeah, so the ASFYT series is what I call it. ASFYT stands for Anatomy Studies for Yoga Teachers. So the ASFYT series is a 36-week-long course. It takes about 10 months to get through, and it's offered residentially in New York City. The next one starts September 17th, I believe. So it's either the 17th or the 19th. It meets once a week for 3 hours over a 10-month period. It consists of 3 courses. And all the content is available online for all 3 courses. The first course is called Skeletal Anatomy, Common Injuries, and Yoga Asana. And it basically starts from the ground and builds, goes through the entire skeletal system, covers every bone, every feature, every joint, a lot of the common injuries that occur at each joint, how to keep the joint safe during asana practice, common yoga injuries, how to avoid them. So that's a very juicy module. And then the second 12 weeks is called Muscular Anatomy and Yoga Asana. It's a focus on learning all the muscles, every muscle in the body, where it is, what it does, how to strengthen it, how to stretch it, how weakness might manifest in yoga, how tightness might manifest in yoga. So it's looking at the anatomy and really learning the anatomy, but then always applying it to asana practice. And then the third course, and these all build on each other, so you have to take them in order. The third course is called the Kinesiology of Yoga Asana, And the third course is more of a conversation where now that we've had the first two courses, we just kind of sit back and look at yoga poses and we talk about what's going on in them, what are the risk factors, what's being strengthened, what's being stretched, what are the pros and cons of different alignment choices. And we try not to like say this is the right way to do it, this is the wrong way to do it, but rather what are the pros and cons of these different ways of practicing so you can make an informed decision about it, not a dogmatic decision just based on what you learned in your tradition. So it's meant to kind of empower you in your practice and in your teaching, that third part. And you can learn all about it on the homepage of the anatomy website, asfyt.com. There's a nice little video we put together kind of giving an overview. And everything should be there, but if you have any questions, you can always email us. And then, like I said, the next one in New York starts in September. The home study online version can be started anytime. And if you're not ready to do it now, or you just want to learn more from me for free, there's tons of information on the blog. So you just go through our blog and check it out. It's a lot of videos, a lot of articles. So.
Someone asked, can we take the online training anytime, like later part of the year? So yes, that just got answered. Yeah. You can take it at any time, and you can click the button that is underneath the video that you are watching right now. It is the teal green box on the right side. It says check out Jason's online functional anatomy series, and it will take you to the website. And if you scroll down about 3/4 of the way, you'll see the options for the online version.
Yeah. We just reshot all the video last year. We shot new video of the course. So the online version has been around for a while, but now it's being updated with like brand new video. So the sound and the audio is the sound and the video is a lot better because technology's improved, you know.
I'm giggling to myself as you say technology's improved because
yeah, well, some of it has
just cut out. I mean, yes, it's not 100%, but it's definitely. Let me check if there's any other questions. No. And for those of you that are interested in taking a yoga retreat or a wellness retreat, I have one going on in Bali next July 2018, where I'll be covering not only, it'll be different from a normal yoga retreat. And if you can get the sense from what we've been sharing for the past hour, it's going to be a lot more mindful about how your anatomy functions and really getting a different sense of how yoga can be practiced that doesn't normally get addressed in a studio setting. So if you guys are interested in learning more about that, you can click the box on the left side that says Join Julie's Wellness Retreat in Bali, July 2018. And someone said, awesome, thank you. Well, thank you guys for joining in from wherever you're at and being flexible with the technology and enjoying the humor part of humerus. And with that being said, thank you so much, Jason. For real, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to devote an hour to share about just a snippet of what you've been learning for yourself over the past 20 years, I would say. So thank you very much for sharing it with the world.
Well, thank you for hosting the Science Yoga Sundays. I think it's a very important thing to educate us, to bring us along so that we can make sure yoga has a future, you know, and that we move forward with more knowledge and awareness to keep our students and ourselves safe. So I think that's good.
That is exactly the mission of Science Yoga Sundays, for sure. So hope you all learned something new today. And with that being said, have an awesome, awesome Sunday. See you guys.